In this lecture, we will explain how to write a Product Design Specification, PDS for short. The MS Word template for the PDS is stored in the Documents section in Blackboard. The slides in this video will show you screenshots from that template. The PDS is a formally written design document that clearly defines the product's purpose, features, and functionality. It documents an agreement amongst the project team for the design goals and aligns the design to the marketing spec. You need to complete the marketing requirements spreadsheet before you start work on the PDS. The PDS has provisions for changes to any spec. Typically, this occurs when you realize that it will be prohibitively expensive or time-consuming to meet a certain spec. Then you will want to reduce it in complexity or eliminate it altogether so that you can get the project done. It is a bad idea to avoid writing or maintaining the PDS. In that case, nobody fully understands the goals and details about the project. The detailed product design phase goes into an endless loop, mass confusion reigns, and frustration builds amongst the team members. Then people question why they can never finish the project. Don't go there. Diligently write a well-defined PDS. The PDS contains implicit content in the form of how you write the specs and explicit content in terms of written details in the specs. First, let's go over the implicit content. Defining your specs is a method of convincing your customer to buy the product. We call this our value proposition. We have a place in the PDS template for you to define your product principles. We want you to write these simple statements as a way to avoid adding unnecessary bells and whistles to your design. This way, you stay focused on the essential values of the product. For a microwave, you might write, "It heats food." For a skateboard, you might write, "It gets you places on campus." For a backpack, you could write, "It holds books, food, and water." You should write your specs so that a person skilled in the art, in other words, one who knows the product designs in detail, can understand it. Including a little engineering speak is okay. Your PDS will form a central part of your project reports. Therefore, we are looking for your team's writing style to be clear, succinct, and logical. Formally speaking, we want you to write how your design meets the target user's needs. We have a spot for you to define functional requirements, the service environment in terms of operating temperature, humidity, pressure, etc., the size of your product, power requirements, and a bit about packaging. Designing products fully out of recyclable materials is common these days. Here's a few tips for you to consider when writing your PDS. First, understand your audience for the document. It should be written for technically astute people who also have some understanding of the product. Include only what people need to know to design the product. Edit out extraneous information. Create a brief outline of the document first. Our template is set up for you to do this. Make sure to use consistent terminology across all of the specs. Distinguish between must-have and desired but not required. Have all your teammates proofread the PDS before you finalize it and submit it as part of the project report. Please use MS Word for the PDS as well as project reports. You can cut and paste photos, figures, and files into the PDS and project reports as needed. Here's some pitfalls to avoid when writing your PDS. Prioritize your requirements in order of importance, or else you won't have time to implement them all in the design. Classify them as priority 1 for essential, in other words, must-have, 2 for nice-to-have, and 3 for low priority. Do not make improper or unfounded assumptions. This usually happens when you don't understand the customer's environment or you have an invalid value proposition. Watch out for incomplete, ambiguous, or over-ambitious specs. This leads to conflicts in your requirements or mass confusion as to the design task. Avoid documenting the design solution in the PDS. Focus on defining the problem. Lastly, you won't finish the project if you have too many features. That usually occurs when you don't properly prioritize the requirements. Now let's show you the template for the PDS. On the first page, you write your team members and other project information. You also fill out the revision block so you know which version of the PDS you're editing. The revision block is taken from a typical mechanical drawing. Your first version is always revision A. Each time you revise the PDS, write down a brief summary in the field for description of change. In section 1.1, write a paragraph about your project where you answer the questions noted. In section 1.2, define what is in scope for the project. This means what part of the market requirements you've decided to tackle with your senior design project. Then define the opposite, in other words, what is out of scope. The blue font in this PDS template is used wherever we give you an illustrative example of what a team might write for a section. That doesn't mean you use it as written. You still need to write relevant prose for your own PDS. In section 2.1, you define user characteristics for each type of user for the document. This is helpful as it reminds you whom you're designing the product for and what these people may care about in terms of features. In section 2.2, you define the product or user principles as we discussed a few slides ago. In section 2.3, you document constraints on your design options. Here's a few examples. If your product has electronics in it and is used outdoors, you better design it to be waterproof. If you use rechargeable batteries in the product, the customer will need ready access to AC power. If your customer has physical disabilities, state what they are in a few words about how you will adapt your design accordingly. In section 3, we start defining specific requirements. The first part of this section defines how to prioritize them and gives tips on good writing specs. We want you to number your requirements, and we give you 3 prefixes to use in the numbering scheme. FR is for major functional requirements for the system, reliability, size, or safety. SE is for service environment, meaning the temperature, humidity, pressure, and other types of these specs. PA is for packaging and ergonomic issues. If your project is meant to benefit people with physical disabilities, there should be a good number of packaging requirements. The blue font again refers to illustrative examples of how to write up the requirements. Here are some illustrative examples of service and packaging requirements. In the rightmost column, write down the date you created the requirement or the date you modified it. The comments column is for your own reminders to self about what you put down for a requirement or what you still need to find out in the near future. This section shows where you document requirements that have been changed or deleted. Before you alter or delete requirements from section 3, copy them over to this section. Then you will have a record of the original requirements before you start to alter them. In section 3.3, you write down how you will design the product for ease of maintenance by the customer. You write down the necessary spare parts for the customer to keep in section 3.4. In section 3.5, you write down which engineering standards are applicable to your design. More about those standards in an upcoming video. This slide shows some good references about how to write a PDS. I used them when I created the PDS template that you're going to use for this class.